Mobutu Sese Seko. The rise, fall and final days of Zaire's longest-serving leader, Mobutu Sese Seko, born Joseph-Désiré Mobutu on October 14, 1930, in Lisala, Belgian Congo, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, was the leader of Zaire, now the DRC, for over 3 decades. Known for his authoritarian rule, lavish lifestyle, and the creation of a personality cult, Mobutu's leadership style is often seen as a tragic example of dictatorship that led to the devastation of his country. His demise, both politically and physically, unfolded in exile following his removal from power in 1997. This detailed account will cover the circumstances surrounding Mobutu's death, its causes, where he was buried, and the legacy of his leadership. How Mobutu Sese Seko came to power. Mobutu's rise to power in the early 1960s was tied to the tumultuous period following the independence of the Belgian Congo in 1960. The young country struggled with internal instability, ethnic divisions, and the departure of Belgian colonial authorities. Amidst this chaos, Mobutu, who was then a colonel in the army, seized control of the government in a 1965 coup. The coup was supported by the US and Western countries during the Cold War, as they saw Mobutu as a reliable anti-communist ally. After the coup, Mobutu became the de facto leader of the country and later assumed the title of president. He consolidated his power by purging political rivals and instituting a one-party state under the Popular Movement of the Revolution, MPR. Mobutu's government, while initially popular for bringing some stability to the country, quickly became marked by authoritarianism, corruption, and exploitation. Over the years, Mobutu established a strongman rule, using state resources for personal gain, silencing opposition, and securing international support through his strategic alliances. Mobutu's reign was also characterized by his extensive efforts to create a personal cult of personality. He promoted an ideology known as authenticity, which sought to distance the country from its colonial past. This was symbolized by the renaming of the country from the Democratic Republic of the Congo to Zaire in 1971 and the changing of Mobutu's own name to Mobutu Sese Seko Koko Mbendu Wazabanga, meaning the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, will go from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. While Mobutu maintained the support of Western powers, especially during the Cold War, his leadership began to falter in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The lack of economic progress, widespread corruption, and growing discontent within the population led to a decline in his popularity. This discontent would eventually result in his ousting. How Mobutu Sese Seko died. Mobutu's death occurred in the final stages of his political downfall. In the mid-1990s, the political climate in Zaire became increasingly unstable. Mobutu's government faced mounting opposition both from within the country and from neighboring countries. A Tutsi-led rebellion, supported by Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, began to gain momentum. The rebels, led by Laurent Kabila, ultimately marched on the capital city of Kinshasa, and Mobutu's government was overthrown in May 1997. Mobutu, who had ruled for 32 years, fled Zaire in the face of the advancing rebels. He initially sought refuge in Togo before moving to Morocco, where he would spend his final months in exile. At the time of his departure, Mobutu was suffering from prostate cancer, a disease that had been diagnosed years earlier. His health had been deteriorating for some time, and he was in need of urgent medical care. In the months leading up to his death, he had undergone various treatments in France, Switzerland, and Morocco, but his condition worsened. Mobutu was hospitalized at the Mohammed V military hospital in Rabat, Morocco, where he passed away on September 7, 1997, at the age of 66. His death was officially attributed to complications from prostate cancer, which had spread to other parts of his body. He had undergone surgery in July 1997 to treat serious bleeding complications, which were likely linked to his worsening illness. His death marked the end of an era in Zaire, now the DRC, and it symbolized the collapse of the regime that had dominated the country for over 3 decades. Cause of Mobutu's death was directly caused by prostate cancer, a disease that he had battled for several years. However, the context of his illness cannot be divorced from his political downfall. Mobutu's regime had been severely weakened by corruption, mismanagement, and economic decline. His health problems were compounded by the political and military crisis that led to his eventual overthrow. Reports from various sources suggest that Mobutu had been in declining health since the early 1990s. He had undergone treatment in Switzerland and France for his cancer before fleeing to Morocco. By the time he arrived in Morocco in 1997, his illness was at an advanced stage. The Moroccan government allowed him to receive medical care on humanitarian grounds, but his condition rapidly worsened. Mobutu's failing health mirrored the collapse of his political system. His inability to maintain control over the military and the country's political institutions, coupled with the rise of rebel forces, left him with few options but to flee into exile. The economic and political chaos in Zaire, combined with Mobutu's deteriorating physical condition, ultimately led to his death. Where was Mobutu buried? After Mobutu's death in Morocco, there was some uncertainty about where he would be buried. Initially, it was reported that Mobutu would be buried in Rabat's Christian cemetery in accordance with the norms for foreign dignitaries. Morocco had agreed to host him on humanitarian grounds, but it was not clear whether the former dictator would be repatriated to Zaire, which had recently undergone a regime change under Laurent Kabila's leadership. Some sources close to Mobutu's family suggested that his relatives expressed a desire to repatriate his body to Zaire for burial. Laurent Kabila's government, which had ousted Mobutu, did not completely rule out the possibility of a return. Raphael Genda, the information minister in Kabila's government, suggested that Mobutu's body could be repatriated, stating, "Why shouldn't the body be repatriated? While he was alive, we said we were happy for him to return." Despite these suggestions, Mobutu's body remained in Morocco. His family ultimately decided to bury him in Rabat, where he had spent his final days. The burial took place in a Christian cemetery, consistent with the traditions of the country where he had lived out his final years. Mobutu's burial in Morocco was a symbolic conclusion to the once powerful leader's life, far from the country he had ruled with absolute authority. How old was Mobutu when he died? Mobutu was 66 years old at the time of his death. Born on October 14, 1930, he lived a relatively long life for someone who spent so much of it under the strain of political power and personal health issues. Despite his youth when he first assumed power, he was just 35 years old at the time of his coup. Mobutu's reign was marred by internal strife, economic collapse, and international isolation. His final years, spent in exile and battling cancer, were in stark contrast to the image of power and invincibility he had cultivated during his reign. Conclusion: Mobutu's legacy. Mobutu Sese Seko's legacy is a complex and controversial one. While he initially brought stability to a country that had been ravaged by political turmoil and internal strife, his authoritarian rule, corruption, and mismanagement ultimately left the Democratic Republic of the Congo in ruin. Under his leadership, Zaire became one of the most corrupt and underdeveloped countries in Africa, and Mobutu himself amassed a personal fortune while the majority of the population lived in poverty. Mobutu's leadership style which included fostering a personality cult and suppressing political opposition, left a lasting impact on the DRC. His fall from power was precipitated by a combination of his health problems, the erosion of his political support, and the rise of a rebellion that was backed by neighboring countries. His death in exile in Morocco symbolized the end of an era, but the effects of his dictatorship continue to resonate in the political and social fabric of the DRC to this day.